This situation took place a few months back during the spring. It was one of those strange transitional periods in my life. I had just graduated, didn't yet have any real responsibilities, and found myself with far too much free time on my hands. I'd actually finished my schooling a semester early, which seemed like a brilliant idea when I was drowning in assignments. But once I actually had all that free time, I was completely lost as to what to do with it. My full-time job wouldn't start until June, and most of my friends were still busy with classes and finals. So for the time being, I was just drifting, feeling stuck between two phases of my life. It was actually quite unsettling and made me feel pretty worthless. I'm the type of person who needs to be constantly productive. So just sitting around day after day watching time pass was driving me crazy. That's likely why I readily agreed when my mom asked me to check on my Uncle Rick's beach house. It was supposed to be an easy favor. Drive down to Rehoboth Beach, ensure there were no leaks or damage, do some minor maintenance to save Rick the cost of hiring someone. Oh, and by the way, I should mention I'm from Pennsylvania and Rick's house is in Delaware, so the drive isn't excessively long. It's just a little over 2 hours. The house itself is massive, the kind that comfortably sleeps my entire extended family during the summer. We're talking 25 of us crammed into one place, playing games and drinking excessively. Honestly, those two activities are probably the most defining things about our family gatherings. This house isn't exactly right on the shoreline, but it's also not too far from the beach. It's situated in a quieter neighborhood characterized by tall beach grass and winding roads. Fast forward to some unremarkable day that week, a day I honestly can't recall. Maybe a Thursday? I left in the late afternoon, which looking back was probably not the smartest move. The drive down was fairly relaxed. When I arrived at the house, everything appeared completely normal. I went inside and followed Rick's checklist, checked the faucets, the circuit breakers, and walked around the property. Everything seemed fine. To be completely honest, it felt strange being there alone. I'd never seen that house without board games scattered about, and the noise of family members drinking. The silence was definitely the most unsettling aspect. The place felt almost abandoned. I'm sure many of you can relate to having a place, maybe a house or restaurant, that's usually incredibly lively when your whole family is there. Now try to picture that same place empty and silent. A bit spooky, wouldn't you agree? Anyway, it was getting late, and I absolutely despise driving at night. So I texted my mom, figuring I'd just stay overnight and head back in the morning. She thought that was a good idea, reminding me to be sure to thank Uncle Rick for letting me stay, which I did. I fixed myself some food, spent a little time on my phone, and then started getting ready for bed. Usually during family visits, I'd end up crammed into one of the smaller rooms on the 3rd floor, while other relatives claimed the nicer, larger rooms. I'm not complaining about the arrangement. That's just how things typically went. However, since I had the whole house to myself that night, I figured I might as well take advantage. The master bedroom on the 2nd floor has its own bathroom, a huge walk-in closet, and a bed that's incredibly comfortable. Making that decision was easy. That's where I'd be sleeping. I got into bed around midnight and quickly fell asleep. I don't recall what time it was when I awoke, only that something had startled me. I was still groggy, but I was certain I'd heard a sound coming from the closet, like something had fallen inside. Without making a sound, I turned my head to look at the closet. Even that small movement sent my heart racing. My mind was alert, but my body wouldn't cooperate, refusing to move. It was like sleep paralysis, but without the actual paralysis. I could move, I just didn't want to. I didn't want to discover what might be in that closet. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to will myself back to sleep. And for a moment, I almost succeeded. But the very instant I started drifting off again, I heard it. A muffled thud coming from inside the closet. I squinted my eyes slightly and tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. But I knew it wasn't. As if overcome by an invisible force, I lay there completely frozen, unable to control my body in any way. This time it wasn't voluntary. I truly couldn't move. Until that moment, I didn't truly grasp what being frozen in place meant. I listened in horror as the closet door slowly creaked open. Through barely open eyes, I watched as a dark figure stepped into the room. It just stood there beside the bed, completely still, watching me. Maybe 20 seconds passed, each one feeling impossibly long. Then silently it turned and left the room. I remained completely still, barely breathing. The footsteps moved across the floor. But instead of heading downstairs as I expected, they creaked upstairs to the 3rd floor. My stomach churned. The only staircase led up there. There was no other way out. My mind was screaming at me to do something, but I was too terrified. I doubted I could overpower a grown man. I had no idea if he was armed. My only option was to wait. After what felt like an eternity in my own head, I mustered the courage to break free from the paralysis. Quietly, I reached for my phone and dialed 911. As soon as the dispatcher answered, I whispered as softly as I could, telling them someone was in the house. I slipped out of bed and quietly locked the bedroom door. Then I waited. Minutes dragged by painfully until flashing red and blue lights illuminated the windows. I was actually quite surprised by how quickly the police arrived. I ran downstairs, flung open the front door, and nearly collapsed in relief at the sight of the officers. They didn't hesitate. They rushed inside, moving swiftly through the house. I waited outside. It didn't take them long. According to them, the house was empty. I was in disbelief. I had heard the footsteps go upstairs, and there was nowhere else to go, so he must have still been inside. There was no other explanation. The police insisted he must have slipped past me, that I was too freaked out to notice. I knew that wasn't true, but what could I say? The person had vanished. I wasn't comfortable letting the police just leave, however, so I called Rick. Rick wasn't pleased. He snapped at the police and demanded they search again, emphasizing that my life might have depended on it. So they did. They conducted a more thorough search this time. Rick told me to follow them and watch what they were doing, which I did. The officers moved methodically, opening every closet and checking under beds, tapping on the walls as if expecting to find something hidden. They pulled back the shower curtain in every bathroom, double-checked the locks on doors and windows, and that's when they found it. One of the bedroom windows on the 3rd floor, the very room I should have been sleeping in, was unlocked. One officer stayed by the door while another went downstairs and onto the back deck. I chose to go outside with the second officer, mostly because the thought of being locked in the house with a stranger was sickening. The officer shone his light around the property but found nothing. He started scanning the roof, and to my horror, his beam caught something terrifying. It was him. It was the stranger who had been in the house. He was just sitting there on the roof. He was a repulsively looking bald man in ragged clothes who appeared to haven't showered in years. The next hour was a blur. The cops communicated, and they got the man off the roof and into custody. The police said he was likely homeless and squatting in the house for days, perhaps longer. But when they asked him how he got in, how long he'd been there, and why he was hiding in the closet, he didn't answer. He just maintained that eerie, vacant look, as if none of it mattered. He was put in the back of a police car shortly after, and that was the end of it. The whole incident was so bizarre that it's still hard for me to fully process. Honestly, I can't figure out why that man had been hiding in that particular closet. Maybe he heard me arrive and hid in the first place he thought of. I still don't know how he got into the house. Rick doesn't either. It's impossible to access the roof from the ground, so that explanation doesn't really make sense. My extended family has been pushing Rick to improve the home security, but he's refused every time for reasons I can't fathom. Thinking about how different things might have been if I'd been sleeping in my assigned bedroom still gives me chills. Story 2. My friend Mike owns a beach house on the Jersey Shore. Describing it as a beautiful property would be an understatement. It's truly magnificent, or at least, that's how it felt to me, coming from a background where we didn't have much. I don't really know the full history of the place. After all, it's not my family's house. But from what I do know, that house has been in their family for generations. Mike's grandparents had been trying to live there permanently for a long time. Unfortunately, they passed away recently. With no one living there anymore, the house mostly sits empty, as most of Mike's extended family is on the West Coast, and his parents are too busy to use it much. The upside to this otherwise sad situation is that Mike can basically use it whenever he wants. I'm fairly certain his dad originally planned to rent it out to make some extra money, but as far as I know, that idea hasn't really progressed. Finding renters for a beach house during the off-season isn't exactly easy, so I can't really blame him. It was sometime in mid-July when Mike reached out and asked if I wanted to come down for the weekend. He didn't need to ask twice. I had nothing else going on, and the thought of relaxing at a beach house, especially a nice one, was an easy yes. His plan was simple. We'd hang out, maybe hit the beach during the day, then head to the boardwalk at night, just enjoying the shore vibe. It wasn't going to be some wild party weekend or anything like that, just a relaxed escape from the everyday. And honestly, I was looking forward to it. Mike and I live close, so he was going to pick me up and drive down with me. That Friday, I packed a bag, put it in his trunk, and we made the drive. The first night was pretty chill. We arrived around 6, dropped our stuff off in the upstairs bedrooms, and settled in. The house had that cozy, slightly musty beach house smell, a mix of salt air and old wood. Not in a bad way, more like it had history. You could tell it had seen decades of family summers. After grabbing a quick bite from a nearby sub shop, we decided to walk the beach for a bit just to soak in the evening. Mike had brought some fishing rods, so we figured we'd try our luck for a while. It wasn't really about catching anything, though. It was more about being out there. At some point, we stumbled upon 2 girls around our age. They were walking barefoot along the shoreline, and true to Mike's nature, he started up a conversation right away. They were local, or at least semi-local, and it turned into one of those low-key, slightly flirtatious interactions that happen naturally when you're young and on the beach at night. We got their numbers, and they continued walking while we kept fishing. There were still quite a few people around since it was peak season, but Mike knew all the quiet spots. Private beach access, paths through the dunes, little nooks between houses where the lights didn't reach. We ended up finding a nice stretch to ourselves where the only sounds were the water and the wind. It was the kind of night that made you forget about real life for a bit. The next morning, we woke up around 9 through and decided to go for a run along the boardwalk. It was already warm out by then, but the ocean breeze made it tolerable. We weren't doing anything crazy, just a couple miles to get the blood flowing. Mike's pretty active, and I've been trying to stay in shape, so it felt good to move after a night of relaxing. The rest of the day kind of slipped by without us really noticing. Later that evening, Mike suggested we hit a few bars in Seaside, but we were both pretty wiped. Even though the idea sounded fun in theory, the thought of waiting in line and shouting over music didn't really match how we felt after a full day in the sun. We ended up crashing kind of early instead. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sharp, piercing beeping. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but after a couple of seconds lying there in the dark, I realized it was real. It sounded like a smoke detector, one of those high-pitched alarms that cuts right through your skull. I threw myself out of bed and started scanning my surroundings, trying to figure out where the beeping was coming from. It didn't sound like it was coming from my room or anywhere else on the second floor. After focusing for a few more seconds, I got the impression it was actually coming from above me. Without thinking, I yanked the bedroom door open and made a beeline for Mike's room. With both hands, I shook him awake and told him to follow me. He immediately understood the situation and hurried after me, not even bothering to put a shirt on. As if our lives depended on it, the 2 of us bolted up the stairs, completely unsure of what we'd find. The 3rd floor was mostly dark, except for a little moonlight filtering in through the window at the end of the hall. We flipped the lights on and started scanning the area, still expecting to see or smell smoke, but there was nothing. No smoke, no flickering lights, no signs of a fire at all. Actually, it was quite baffling. Eventually, after some frustratingly irritating minutes of searching for the source of that awful noise, I found something. In one of the bedrooms, tucked underneath a pillow, was a small black device. Before calling Mike into the room, I decided to examine it myself for a bit, mostly out of pure confusion. It was about the size of a walkie-talkie, all black except for a blinking red light on top. That was it. No buttons, no stickers, no screen. Just a smooth black casing, the blinking light, and a single switch on the side. Or at least what looked like a switch. I flipped it off, and the beeping stopped immediately. Mike came into the room just then. His eyes darted from the bed to me to the device in my hand. Neither of us said anything right away. We made eye contact, and I could tell he was just as confused and just as scared as I was. After a few more seconds of silence, he asked if I'd ever seen that black thing before. I said no and asked him the same, and he also said no. For the next hour, we tried figuring out what that thing was, how it got there, and what had set it off. But none of the explanations we came up with felt satisfying. Mike swore none of his family members had been in that house recently, and I believed him. Why would he lie about that? Plus, who would put such a device in their own home? Maybe for safety, or perhaps as a substitute for a faulty upstairs smoke detector. But again, there was no fire, so it hadn't actually prevented anything. And then there was the matter of how it had been triggered in the first place. That was the scariest part. We were sitting in Mike's room in the dark when I had a wild thought. I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of it sooner. The switch. I pulled out the device and quickly flipped the switch on and off. And just as I suspected, the piercing beeping started up again and stopped the moment I flipped it off. We both froze. Mike whispered, "Oh my God!" The realization hit us simultaneously. The only way to operate the device was manually. Someone else was in the house. We didn't waste any time. Mike dialed the police while I locked the door, barricading it as best I could. We waited for what felt like forever, and finally the police arrived. We quickly went downstairs to meet them and gave them a brief explanation of what was happening. They did a full sweep of the house while we waited outside, as they instructed. When they came back downstairs, what they told us was horrifying. Apparently, every single window on the third floor was wide open, even the bathroom windows. And it wasn't just the windows. The beds were flipped, drawers were pulled out of dressers, and everything was thrown onto the floor. The room where I had found the device looked completely ransacked, even though it had seemed neat when we searched earlier. I felt like I was losing my mind, and so did Mike. But after being taken upstairs by the officers, we had no choice but to accept the reality. The officers didn't find much else. No one hiding, no prints, no weapons. After another 20 minutes or so, they advised us to make sure all the windows were locked from then on, and to call again if anything else happened. Then they just left. Mike and I didn't feel safe staying in that house after someone, probably someone crazy or on drugs, had messed with us in such an unexplainable way. But we had no choice. We told ourselves we'd get through the rest of the night there and leave early in the morning. And that's what we did. Luckily, whoever had been in the house must have left, because nothing else happened throughout the night. There are still parts of that night I can't explain, and I can only imagine what Mike must be feeling. For all we know, whoever was in that house that night might have never actually left. Story 3. This happened a decent while ago, back when I was 22. Enough time has passed that I feel safe talking about it now. I was fresh out of college with a good job and minimal expenses, since I was living at my parents' house. Imagine that, saving a lot of money without worrying about food or rent, while still having full access to my childhood room, my car, and all the comforts of home. It's safe to say I was living a pretty blissful life. I knew how lucky I was to have parents who let me stay home rent-free. I know a lot of people don't have that option, so I never took it for granted, but not everything was as stress-free as it might seem. What I'm about to tell you happened less than a month into my time back home. I've never really been what people my age call a party girl. I don't drink excessively, I don't spend all my free time at clubs, and I definitely don't let men dictate my life. That's just how I was raised. My father is the most important man in my life, and the idea of hookup culture really disgusts me. Because of all that, my life is pretty routine. Wake up, satisfy my caffeine addiction, go to work, go to the gym, read a bit at home, mess around on my phone, and go to sleep. Weekends are for hiking, short road trips, board games, and whatever else I feel like doing. But one random weekend, my closest friend from college, Lindsay, invited me and our other two friends, Sabrina and Thea, to spend a few days at her family's beach house. I'd never been there, but based on how Lindsay talked about it, the place sounded like a dream. Quiet, tucked away from the touristy chaos on its own private beach, and just a short walk from the water. To be blunt, Lindsay's family is very wealthy. I think both her parents were neurosurgeons, so I suspected her beach house would be incredible, and I wasn't disappointed. When I first saw it, I was completely stunned. Look, I'm no architect, but I know modern style when I see it. And Lindsay's house must have been ultra-modern. It looked more like a covert military safe house than a personal home. I'd love to show you pictures of it. Believe me, I have plenty. But out of respect for Lindsay's family, I think showing them would be in really poor taste, even if what I'm about to tell you didn't happen. The four of us unloaded our stuff and decided where we'd be sleeping. Lindsay's house had enough individual bedrooms for all of us, but what would be the fun in that? Instead, the four of us stayed in the same room, one of the kids' bedrooms with 2 sets of bunk beds and its own bathroom. We'd been staying there for 3 nights, which I think is the perfect amount of time to spend together, unless those people are your family. I tend to be a bit irritable, so anyone who's not clean or polite tends to annoy me pretty easily. Not that any of my friends are like that, but you know how it is. I know I mentioned my relatively boring lifestyle already, but if there was ever a time to drink, it was that weekend with my friends, so I definitely planned on loosening up a bit more than usual. We wanted to keep the first night pretty relaxed, though, so we walked down to the private beach connected to the house and sat in the sand, stargazing. The four of us were drinking White Claws and listening to house music on Sabrina's speaker when we noticed something in the distance. It was this faint flickering light coming from further down the shore. We quieted down a bit and watched the light flicker on and off. The sight was kind of hypnotic, as eerie as it was. After a while, it became clear the light was swinging back and forth like someone walking with a flashlight. And soon after, we realized that's exactly what it was. It looked like 3 or 4 people strolling in our direction at a leisurely pace. Not running, not stumbling, not moving strangely, just walking normally. As they got closer, we started hearing laughter, which made all of us relax a bit. Considering how late it was, they were probably just a group of teenagers or people our age. They must have noticed us because at some point, one of them yelled out, "Hi," in a friendly voice. It was a guy's voice, and he sounded around our age. Thea yelled back, and we had some small talk while they walked over. As they approached, we could see it was a group of 3 guys, maybe a year or 2 older than us. They all had that typical beach boy look, which I could tell right away my friends were into, especially Thea. She gets a bit carried away with guys, so I wasn't surprised. She knows how I feel about her lifestyle, so it's not like I'm saying anything crazy. To be fair, she is incredibly attractive, and I've never seen a guy not take a liking to her. The guys sat down with their beers, and the 7 of us continued drinking. It was actually a really great time. The guys weren't overly flirtatious, but they weren't boring either. An hour or so and several drinks later, they invited us back to their place. Personally, I was exhausted and was leaning towards going to sleep, but I could tell all 3 of my friends wanted to keep hanging out with the guys, especially Thea, of course. I decided not to be the party pooper and told them to go on without me. There were only 3 guys after all, and I had no intention of hooking up with anyone that night. I walked back towards Lindsay's house while the 6 of them walked along the beach, presumably heading towards wherever the guys were staying. I freshened up and went to bed. Sometime after 3 in the morning, I woke up to a FaceTime call from Lindsay, which was strange since she should have either been home by then or asleep next to one of the guys. I answered groggily, and what she said instantly woke me up. She basically screamed into the phone that Thea and Sabrina had been kidnapped and that I needed to get her car immediately. Her words felt like a bucket of ice-cold water splashed across my face. I've never felt a more intense sense of fear and adrenaline. I didn't waste a second. My hands were literally shaking as I quickly threw on some clothes and sprinted down the stairs. I asked her why she called me instead of the police, and she reassured me she already had. She told me to stay on the line as she walked me through what to do. With her instructions, I managed to open the driveway gate, find her keys, and speed out of there in minutes. She told me they were about 10 houses down the beach to the left, so that's where I started driving. She described the car and told me the direction it had gone in, and I slammed on the gas, trying to catch up. There wasn't a single car on the road, and I was driving at an incredibly unsafe speed. It was a miracle I didn't get pulled over. After a few minutes, I noticed a car matching Lindsay's description driving slowly in the distance. Then I hung up, called the police, and gave them the exact location. The dispatcher told me to keep my distance so as not to alert them. So that's what I did. After what felt like forever, I saw cop lights up ahead. The car didn't try to evade the police. I imagine they assumed it was an unrelated stop. I pulled over and watched everything unfold. It was pure chaos. The cops forced all three men out of the SUV at gunpoint. They cuffed them and escorted them back to a cruiser. Then one officer opened the trunk to reveal both Thea and Sabrina, bound and looking pretty badly bruised. As horrifying as that was, it was nothing compared to hearing their side of the story. All three of them were comfortable with me sharing this. By the way, we're still close, so I asked them, but none of them wanted to tell it themselves, and for good reason. To keep it brief, after I went to bed, they continued drinking. Lindsay was the only one who remembers things clearly since she was trying to be responsible, given it was her family's house. At some point, the guys Thea and Sabrina were with suggested they all go to bed. So the four of them split off while Lindsay told the third guy she was going home. He got really upset about that, which Lindsay initially thought was because he wanted to hook up with her. She told him she would have been down for that, but had to watch her house, and he got angry. They argued for a bit, and he ended up telling Lindsay to get the hell out of his house and never come back, which she was more than happy to do. Halfway home, she realized she'd forgotten her purse, so she went back to get it. That's when she saw the guys throwing Thea and Sabrina into the back of the car before driving off. She called the police, then me, and that was that. Thea's parents are both lawyers, and they went through tremendous effort to do two things: keep the incident as far away from the public eye as possible, and ensure those guys received maximum prison sentences. They achieved both. It turns out the house the guys were staying in didn't belong to them at all. It was owned by some random older couple who were on vacation in a different country. That, plus the other serious crimes they were charged with, ensured they were locked up for a long time, although I still believe no sentence could ever adequately compensate for what they did. As much as I hate admitting it, this incident traumatized me for years. I couldn't handle beaches, late nights, or talking to strangers, no matter how harmless they seemed or how safe the situation felt. I became antisocial and drifted away from the girls for a while. But fortunately, things have improved since then. I can't even begin to imagine how Thea and Sabrina were affected by it. Part of me thinks not remembering anything might be a blessing. I think the craziest part of the whole ordeal is the fact that, had I not gone home, I might not have been able to reach Lindsay's car in time. And if that hadn't happened, the police might never have found those guys' car.